Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to an old friend tonight, Mr. Rod Nichols from down there in Texas with Bexar County Bigfoot. How's it going tonight, Rod?
Doing great, dude. How are you, man?
Doing awesome. Man, it's probably been, I would guess, a few years since we last talked on the show. What do you think?
I want to say it was like 2 years.
Okay.
And you weren't full time at that particular time, and I think you were trying to get it to where you were doing it full time. And I have to give you kudos, dude. I have to give you a shout out and say I'm super stoked to see that you're doing this full time and all the hard work that you put into it, man. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of what you're doing, man.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Rod. I really appreciate that. It is a ton of work, but it's worth it when you talk to individuals where they're like, man, I feel like I can share what's going on and I feel so much better after chatting. And that kind of thing makes all the hard work worth it. But Rod, for those that aren't familiar with what it is you got going on down there, do you mind spending a few minutes talking about Bexar County Bigfoot and what it is that you do down there?
Absolutely. My name is Rod Nichols. I founded Bexar County Bigfoot. I am based out of San Antonio, Texas. Bexar County is the county that San Antonio is in. I got started, I'll just reel back to the beginning a little bit and just go from there. I was somebody that was always into the subject from a young age. I felt like I was a believer from the beginning. I knew there was more out there in the world and in the United States, for that matter, than your typical animals. You see bears and cats and things like that. I knew there was more out there, and so for me, it was just something I think that was just bound to happen. And I think it all came to a head when, unfortunately, I was on disability from my job, and I was mobile. I had really nothing else going on in my life. It was just me and my son. And I watched a channel from a guy in Utah who presented his trace evidence in the form of wood structures and footprints. And he had talked about his encounters that he had with these creatures as well. But the wood structure thing really stood out to me. It really did, because if you're ignorant to the subject, you tend to believe that this is just all in Washington State, or maybe it's in Northern California, or maybe it's in Oregon, and that's where that's at. And there's just one Bigfoot out there, and that's it, And come to find out, there's a population that spans across the United States, and there are thousands of encounters and sightings of these creatures all over the United States. And I binge watched this gentleman's channel, like from top to bottom. And the last video he put out was him showing everyone how he finds his trace evidence, how he finds his wood structures, his methodology, if you will. And the criteria was you have to have a habitat that supports big game, and you have to have a water source close by, and you have to look at the lay of the land, the topography, and make sure that makes sense. What I mean by that is that you have to have some type of passage in and out of that piece of land. And for me, it came in the form of this creek greenbelt called the Salado Creek in San Antonio, which is a very historical creek for the Native Americans back in the 17 and 1800s. There was a famous battle after the Battle of the Alamo as well. It was part of the Texas Revolution. And understanding that this creek was very prominent, it had history, but also understanding the history of this creek in the way that Native Americans used this creek greenbelt to go in and out of San Antonio. It was their highway. And lo and behold, I live on the creek, basically. My apartment complex is really a stone's throw from that creek. And I thought that was a good place to start. What he laid out to his audience was very intriguing. And he said, hey, look, if you think that this is a hoax, if you think that I'm putting you on here, here is how I find my trace evidence. And I'm going to challenge you to go out and find the same trace evidence using the methodology that I've laid out for you. So the next morning, I got up, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and I went out to go find a wood structure. And on the same day, my son and I went out to go find a wood structure. We found a wood structure. And that just blew my mind, because I didn't think that this was something that would come to fruition, really, because you're watching it on YouTube and maybe you're watching on TV and things like that. And then there's this guy telling you, hey, look, this is how I do it, and go out and try it. And man, you go out and you find exactly what you're looking for. And, in the beginning, I thought, God, this has got to be a hoax. There's got to be people out there that are doing these things. And, it's just this grand scheme, right? And I really feel, looking back now, that was just ignorance on my part. But that wasn't the truth. These things that I find, these wood structures that I find, are very intricate. They're very crudely built. There's no uniformity to them as far as humans versus alleged cryptid built type of wood structures. So I really clung to the wood structure phenomena, and that's where I've left it. And for 7 years, that was in almost 7 years, right? 2018 is when I started. March 2018 is when I started. So I guess about almost 7 years, I was out there in the woods. I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. And, what I found was that off of this creek, Greenbelt, there are several different wilderness parks that are heavily wooded, that have tributaries off of this creek that have this trace evidence. I have found wood structures in several different wilderness parks. And again, I sat there and I said, is this truly people? Is this a hoax? What's going on? This is really baffling. But then when I started examining these wood structures, I was looking at pieces that were 10 to 15 feet tall, maybe about 8 to 10 inches around, whole trees that are torn limb from limb with the root system still attached, pulled out of the soil and fashioned into an A-frame structure or a wigwam or a lean type of structure. And then everything just started to try to, I guess, things started percolating in my mind as far as like, man, what person is that strong to pull out a tree with a root system and then put it together into a TP or an A-frame type of structure? So again, that was something that really was baffling to me. And that's where I've kept it. And, my wife and I, who is out of town right now, but we have become pretty much a team. And we've been out and searching through these wilderness parks and going through different parks, different territory alongside of this creek. And that's where we've kept it. I've dubbed myself as the wood structure guy because I've seen so many of them. And here's the interesting part about this, Jeremiah, is that I can take a lot of the wood structures that I find in my areas that I've documented, and I can put them up against somebody that's found wood structures in Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, Oklahoma, Vermont, all over the U.S., because people are finding these wood structures all over the U.S. And for me, looking at the comparison of what I document up against somebody else that is a researcher in another state, why is it that these things almost look identical? Either it's the greatest hoax known to mankind, or it's a cryptid thing. And so I tend to lean towards that it is a cryptid thing. And I base this off of encounters from other people that have had interviews with various podcasts, your podcast as well. And so that's where I've kept it. And things have been going since 2018, and that's what we've been doing.
Rod, wood structures, as you call them, are so interesting. And Before I went out to Oregon, I'll tell you the truth, I wasn't really sold on it. But then out 30 miles in the woods, man, I saw some stuff and I was like, what is going on out here? This is not an area where just some Joe Schmo can come and just put something together. This is out there. So I totally get it. Now, when you're looking for these wood structures, have you found things that you know what to look for that might not stick out to the person who's just getting used to it? Things that are like the telltale sign of, yeah, I've got something here.
Sure, absolutely. So what I look at first and foremost is the design overall, the design of the wood structure overall. And I've labeled them. And I know people that are tenured researchers have labeled these wood structures in certain categories the same way that I have. So I've got it down to wigwam, A-frame, TP, and lean style structures. And recently I started finding something that looked like a corral type of wood structure as well, where the pieces are formed like a horseshoe and there's one opening in and out, and that's it. To look at the pieces that are involved, did this tree grow in this area, or was it actually pulled out of the ground, or was it deadfall and it came from somewhere else? And also, too, the root system, that's something that's always apparent in some of these wood structures, at least for me. The root system of some of these trees are still attached. There's no saw marks or chainsaw cuts. There's no exact cuts to some of these wood structures because these pieces have been pulled out of the ground. Also, too, there's some type of weaving that these things are subjected to as far as the construction goes. There's smaller sticks that are woven in and out. Sometimes they'll use the palmetto leaves, which is a very long, narrow type of leaf, and they'll take these palmetto leaves and maybe make a knot and tie other pieces together. But the one thing that stands out to me in all this stuff is that the overall construction of these wood structures are very crude. There's no uniformity to these things. So and the reason why I say that is because I always get what if it's bushcraft, Rod, and it's the Boy Scouts that are doing this stuff, and maybe there's a guy teaching a bushcraft class and you just didn't get there in time or whatever. And my answer to that is that I know what bushcraft looks like. There's uniformity. Usually there's a handsaw involved, so there are exact cuts. And some of these bushcraft shelters are very low to the ground. They're not grand in stature. And some of these wood structures that I have found are very grand in stature. I'm about 5'10". I have found wood structures that I can stand up in very easily and still have about 5 or 6 inches to the ceiling. What or who is building these, I have no idea, but they are very crude. It's almost, I almost want to say it's a caveman built these things. There's rocks inside, there's big rocks inside these things. There's big pieces, there's small pieces, but there's no uniformity. So with bushcraft, there's more uniformity in the pieces. There's more in bushcraft. These things are just thrown together and woven and crudely built. So those are the things that I look for. As far as going out into the deeper areas, I have found wood structures out there, but also too, I am of the mindset that these creatures will use creek green belts that are in suburban areas and build wood structures off of these creeks as well in and around suburban areas. And a lot of people don't want to believe that. But I think that when you put yourself in that pigeonhole, you are just throwing, what is the saying, you're throwing the bathwater out without the baby or something. I think I got that wrong. But I think that these things really utilize creek green belts. They follow the food source throughout those creek green belts, but also too, they will build these wood structures in and around suburban areas and also out in the middle of nowhere, so to speak. There you go.
Have you ever experienced looking inside of one of these structures, and have you ever found any hair inside of any of them at all?
I have. I have found some hair samples. I don't know exactly. And so here's the thing, as a DIY researcher, some of the resources that I have to dig around to find somebody that may be able to analyze it for a lower cost or for free, or find a university. I have found hair samples. I guess the jury's out on that because I don't know exactly where it came from. They were longer pieces of hair, longer strands of hair. But then again, I don't know if it came from a possum or a raccoon or things like that. But also, the one thing I do look for are prints around, inside and around these wood structures. And I have found prints. I have about 3 casts that I've done myself that have been around in the areas that I have been documenting for a few years as well. Those are the kind of things that kind of look for, but also too, I have to really debunk myself. I really feel like, if you want it to be Bigfoot, you can make it Bigfoot. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think as far as pareidolia is concerned, you've got that element, but also too, as a researcher, you really have to separate yourself from what you're looking at and go, I have to use critical thinking. Is this people? Let's look at these pieces. What does it look like? Is it homeless people? Is it this? Is it that? And then when I can't think of anything else, and I come to that conclusion where, well, I have no idea what this is, then I think I have something. So that's how I play it with the areas that I have documented over the past 7 years.
I think that's a smart approach, to have a discerning eye on things as you do. Have you ever had any weird things happen after going into a structure or spending time around one? I've gotten reports sometimes where people will have weird after effects or dreams or anything out of the ordinary like that.
Yeah, here's one thing that I hold to. Number one, I don't own the land that I'm documenting these structures. It's not like I can sit there and go, no, this is my spot. You can't come out here. Hey, if you happen to find one and you document it and it's in an area that I've been researching, great, awesome. I'd love to hear your input. I'm not stingy that way. The other thing is, I've gotten into areas where I found footprints, I found a grand structure, and it's in an area where there's nobody around, absolutely nobody around, and it gets a little eerie. I hate to get into the like, I don't know how to say this. I don't know if it's a woo thing, but everybody has something inside of them that can tell them, hey, this doesn't feel, you probably should go. And I've been in situations like that where I have felt really on edge, and I don't know why. Not recently, I would say maybe about a year ago, my youngest daughter found a few tracks in an area that I had never been to in a wilderness park. And it was family time. I was trying to just shut everything off and, have fun with my wife and my youngest daughter. And I found out that I just can't shut it off. When I'm in a wilderness park, it's go time. She found, a few tracks, and we went down into a holler and found a bunch of wood structures. I would say like maybe 5 or 6 wood structures that were just amazing to me. And one of the things that I took note of was I looked at my daughter, and she was on edge. I wasn't on edge. She was. I really feel like she's an empath in a lot of ways. And she was really adamant about leaving out of the area quick. And it was getting dark. It was getting dusky. And she said, we got to go. We got to go. We got to go. And I'm like, wait, what's going on? What, are you okay? She said, no, we have to go right now. And I'm like, what? She's like, I feel like something is watching me, and it feels ugly. We have to go. So, I've had things like that happen, and I pay attention, especially if you have kids with you or teenagers. The younger people, I feel like sometimes are a little bit more in tune than us adults are. and I took heed to that. And I was like, wow, you really felt like something was watching? He said, yeah, I felt like something was staring at me. And I was like, okay, great. But beyond that, my wife and I had gone to a newer area, and this was about a year and a half ago, South San Antonio, off of the same creek greenbelt. And this area was different. It was way different. I had never seen San Antonio like this because it was so different. There was a fresh spring that brought out some really nice, clean, clear water in this creek that I had never seen. I had, some largemouth bass were in there. I found freshwater clams that were in that area off that creek as well, that with the running water. And the reason why we went there, my wife and I, was because a gentleman had messaged me on Instagram talking about his daughter that had gone out to that same area, that same wilderness park, and she had something growl at her behind some thick brush. And she was on the paved trail, just walking or jogging or whatever. She had 2 full-grown huskies, and the dad had said, these huskies will protect, my daughter tooth and nail. Well, when this thing vocalized and projected a vocal at her and her huskies, the dogs just tucked tail and they wanted nothing to do with this thing, whatever it was. They were scared. She ran off and got in her car and took off, and then messaged your dad and told him what had happened. He messaged me and said, hey, could you go out to this area? This is what happened to my daughter, and investigate. I said, absolutely, because that's what we do. So my wife and I went out there and we dug a little deeper, went out in this area where it was just overgrown. It was just a massive cypress trees and just beautiful foliage. The vegetation was awesome. And we went out into this area where people don't go. And we got a growl. We got a growl projected at us. And my wife was the first one because she was in front of me. And she turned around after we had this growl happen. She turned around and looked at me with these frozen, like these scared eyes. And she was just frozen. I was frozen. And she said, did you effing hear that? And I said, yes, I did. And that was something that we had never encountered, a vocal like that. But at the same time, that vocal was projected at us. It was from across the creek. And I don't know if I'd say it's an island area, but it was across the water, across the creek. That vocal came at us. And then there was this high ground that was probably about 15, 20 feet up, like a hill that went up an upgrade. And up on top of that area were other trails, but you can see these little saplings and all these trees that were, you can see the tops of them from the area, the spot that we were at. And something was flanking us at the same time that we had this vocalization projected at us. And I want to say, I felt like it was bipedal steps. This thing was flanking us. And I could see that the saplings, the smaller trees, the tops of them shaking. Whenever this thing walked by, it's almost like it was grabbing trees and shaking them. And the one thing that I took note of was that when I pulled my camera out, my phone, to document and record this activity, it would stop. It would completely stop. And then I'd put my phone away, and then it would start back up and follow us. And I'd pull my phone back out, it would stop. And it was just a very odd situation. But one of the things that we took note of mostly was this growl. It was a low, guttural growl. And the only way I can describe it was that it had a lot of resonance to it. It was low guttural. It almost was equivalent to, I want to say, like an 808 bass hit on a hip hop record. You know what I mean? Like you have that 808 bass that goes, was a vocal that resonated just like that and was low and guttural, and it rattled you from the inside and instantly instilled fear in me and my wife. And so when that happened, we were just freaking out. And the only thing I could think of was to get my wife out of there, to take care of her first. It wasn't, let me pull my phone out and video this, because that's the last thing that's on my mind. I'm thinking about my wife and getting her out there and getting her safe and back to the car. So we just slowly backed away after this growl. got back in the car, and we sat there for a minute just staring at nothing, going, what just happened to us? We had no idea. That was probably one of the most intense situations that we had been in. And that was about a year and a half ago. And ever since then, we've been going back there to try and document a few things, hopefully another vocal, which we have not been able to document since then. But we have found some trace evidence in the form of some wood structures, tree breaks, things like that. So that's probably the most intense, I think, that things that have happened to us.
That is so interesting. And I bet that really changed your wife. What was her viewpoint towards Bigfoot before that happened to her?
It's funny, Jeremiah, when we were dating, I thought to myself, I'm going to tell her exactly what I do and what I'm about. It was always, I'm going to show her the crazy up front. You're going to see it up front, and you decide whether if you want to just not date me anymore and go away, or you're going to embrace it. And she embraced it. She was intrigued by it. I don't know if she was fully on board at that time when I was showing her some of the wood structures, because our second date literally was me showing her some wood structures. And so when that growl was projected at us, I think that changed her mind. I think she changed it to, there is something out there. I don't know what it is, but it's scary. And whatever it is, it's got the attributes of maybe some kind. Because to me, I think it sounded like an ape in a way, and I think maybe that was something that she was thinking as well. Going back to when we first started dating, that was something that really wasn't on her mind. I don't think she really even thought about the subject at all.
Interesting. This area that you're starting to focus on, have there been other, besides the individual that reached out to you, have there been other instances of things being seen and experienced by other people in the same area?
I had posted just a real quick video about what we experienced a while back. I think it was maybe about a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks after that we had this vocalization projected at us. And I had a couple of people on my group page and on Facebook reach out to me and say, hey, like, I've heard about that area, and I've heard of people experiencing vocals. I've heard people experiencing something flanking them. So there has been at least a couple of people who reached out to me and had told me that, yeah, this area has had some things happen. Now, these are not documented sightings or encounters at all, but the fact that people knew the area, knew what I was talking about, knew where we were, and said, I've been there, and yeah, it's sus, but I also have heard so-and-so had this happen to them, or so-and-so had this happen to them out in that area. That kind of solidified it for me as far as it being somewhat active. And, at that time, we had never had anything happen to us like that, ever. I'd never had anything like that happen to me. When these things happen to you, you sit there and think about, you almost think about life in a way. You're like, what, my belief system, what have I been believing in? Like, this is insane. Like, I can't match this vocal up to anything that's indigenous to our area. So it was very, very intense, and my wife was pretty shooken up. But I think that gave us more ammunition to go back out and try to pursue maybe another interaction of some sort. We'll see. I've yet to have anything happen in that area yet, but again, I do know this interaction with these creatures is very rare. It's not something that you just walk out in the woods and it just happens. It just doesn't happen like that. So I think being diligent and being consistent is the key factor here with that area. So that's what we're hoping for. Maybe another interaction of some sort. I don't know.
So when you go out there, do you have pieces of equipment out with you trying to capture audio, or do you have cameras with you, things like that?
What I come equipped with are audio recorders. I have not deployed an audio recorder out there yet, only because I'm number one, these things are expensive. And number two, I don't know if you can say I'm not slow in deploying these things. I really want to make sure that I find a good spot and really get a good understanding of the topography of the area as well, which I have been studying for a while now. And I have not deployed anything yet, but that is something that I'm going to do. And I really believe that this area that we have been going out and documenting is active. And I have a feeling that it's a whole different situation at night. I really do. I just need to find the right spot to deploy that voice recorder. I do have game cams. Frustrating thing about game cams is that I really feel like these creatures can see IR, and I think that just tips them off. And I think if you really want to stop activity, put out some game cams. It'll put it to a halt. And this is something I'm basing off of several different researchers that I have talked to and other eyewitness accounts and interviews as well. So I think the key thing here for me is to focus on the audio, and that's where we're going to go with that particular area.
I think that's a great idea. Besides this one area, have people been reaching out to you about things they've encountered from other parts of the county and San Antonio as well?
I have not had anybody come out and let me know about their encounters. Oh, actually, you know what? No, I take that back, Jeremiah. There was a lady, 72-year-old woman, very nice lady. She had an encounter back in 2005. I interviewed her about, I want to say about 5 months ago. 5 months ago, she sat down and talked to me over the phone. She didn't want to be recorded, so I had to write everything down on a notebook. And she had described a Sasquatch, sure she believed was a Sasquatch, that stood up and walked in front of them in an area that was a part of that creek greenbelt. That the Salado Creek, just so you know, goes all the way north outside of San Antonio, but the southern part of that Salado Creek goes all the way down into other towns in South Texas. It's a very long, vast creek. And alongside of that creek, you also have what's called the Medina River. And the Medina River runs a little close to some of that creek as well. And so she was at an area, and she described it to me. She was out there in her car with her sister, and her sister had her daughter-in-law with her as well. They were trying to just get some fresh air and hang out, and they went to an area that's known as Donkey Lady Bridge. And if you know about Donkey Lady Bridge, it's a San Antonio, I'm just going to say folklore. There's this bridge out there. It's a little bit outside of San Antonio on the southern end. And it's said that if you go out there at night, and I forgot what type of ritual you have to do or something, you can hear like hoofs walking across this bridge, and you can hear something like a donkey, and that scares people. And so people come out there to try to get into some of that stuff, and they think it's fun or whatever. But this particular time that she was out there was during the day. It wasn't at night. And she went across the bridge, parked her car in an area where I think there was more of an open field with some trees. And they were looking out into this area. And she noticed a particular tree where she saw a hand and arm come around this tree, grab it, and something stood up, peeked out behind the tree, and then walked out away from that tree. And she said it was a Sasquatch. She described it as female because she saw the breasts on this particular creature. She had described the hair as being I think a dark brown, dark reddish, long hair that was probably about 3 or 4 inches long off of the creature. She said it locked eyes with her, and she said it walked exactly Patty did. It walked just like that, just turning around and staring at them and just kept on walking. And it went behind some type of a shed. There's a lot of ranches and stuff that are out there. And so you'll have, different various like little buildings and sheds and things like that. Some of these ranches, I think that's what they were. I think that was an area where there was some type of private property where this creature was walking through. And it went behind the shed, she said, and it never came back out. She said either it disappeared or it just went behind that shed and just stayed there. And she described it to a T, and it lined up with a lot of encounters that I've heard as far as the color of the hair, the mannerisms, the way this thing walked, all of these things. And it just lined up. And she said it locked eyes with me. And, as soon as it locked eyes with me, my sister and her daughter-in-law just came unglued. They were freaking out like, you need to go get, start the car. We need to go. They were freaking out. And she froze and she was just staring at this thing. So that was probably one of the only encounters that I have had anybody come out and talk to me about. Whether or not there have been any more, I have yet to find out. Because, and as well as I do, people, they're reluctant to talk about their encounters because there's ridicule, there's, PTSD. Maybe it wasn't a good encounter at all, and these people are scared to death to talk about and relive this stuff. This lady was gracious enough to tell me about her encounter. And so I'm hoping that I can get back out in that area. I've been talking to her a little bit here and there to see if I can get her back out to where I can video and have her recall what happened. I'm hoping to do that hopefully this year or maybe next year. But that was probably one of the more, would you say, Class A sighting that I've heard of in my area. I don't know. I mean, we have encounters that date back to the 70s, though, so you've got the Olivari family back in 1972. They lived up against a wooded area that was close to an Air Force base called Kelly Air Force Base. And they saw this creature walking by their backyard in this heavily wooded area. The neighbor next door had a juvenile that was sitting on her back porch steps. She looked out of her kitchen window at the back porch and saw this hairy little creature sitting on her steps and told it to leave and shoot it away. It got up and ran off. And this was actually documented in the local newspaper as well. We do have a history of sightings and encounters with these creatures. The only one that I have heard of that was, what I described was with that particular lady, I think it was around 2005.
That Donkey Lady Bridge account is just fascinating. Have you ever thought yourself, is a visual something that you would like to experience yourself?
What's funny, I remember being on the show with you the first time, and I remember telling you distinctively, I don't think I wanted an encounter. which was, I have no idea why I said that, because I was thinking about just encounters from other people where they were scary. And I'm sitting there going, I'm in the field and I don't want to see this thing. Like, why is that? As I've progressed in my research and documentation, things like that, yeah, I would love to see one. I would love to see one probably about 500 yards away, maybe give me a good running start away from this thing. But yeah, I think I would like to see or encounter one of these creatures. And you know what? Here's the thing. I think, maybe I have. These creatures are very cunning. They know how to camouflage. They're the master of camouflaging. They're the apex predator out there. So maybe I had passed right by one of them in one of my areas and never knew it. But yeah, I think I would like to. I think I glance at one of these things. So I've changed my mind.
There you go. It's been a while. Hey, that's awesome. I hope that you do have something happen down there. And I think if you keep going out with your wife like you've been doing, there's a big chance that you may, the whole be careful what you wish for is what people told me over the last few years, and probably say the same back back towards you as well. But man, I would say if people are listening, and it's crazy how many people listen to this thing, it's wild. Just the people that reach out, man, never thought that kind of person would listen to this, which is great. But I'm sure there'll be more than a few people that will see, I'll have San Antonio, Texas on the cover, and maybe they have things they've experienced in this area. And I would really recommend, you're always welcome to reach out to me. But the cool thing about Rod is he's an individual that this is his base in San Antonio area and Bexar County. And so he's the type of guy that you would want to reach out to in order to make sure that he knows what areas are the hot areas, and maybe he can even talk to you directly and start to find other areas besides the one he's currently focusing on as well. So is there a way that people can reach out to you, Rod?
Yeah, I'm on all the socials, Instagram, Bexar County Bigfoot, TikTok, Bexar County Bigfoot. I do have a private group on Facebook, which is, again, Bexar County Bigfoot. I also have 2 other pages that I have acquired. One of them is called Bigfoot 101, and the other one is called South Texas Monster Hunter. So I've got 3 different groups, 3 different pages on Facebook as well. And I'll say this, when I tell people San Antonio, Texas, a lot of times it's there's no way Sasquatch would be in San Antonio. And my response to that is, really? Like you're gonna put these creatures in a box and go, there's no way they could be there. There's no way they could be, they can go through this creek or through suburban areas. These creatures are opportunistic. They really are. They're not above dumpster diving. They're not above getting an easy meal. The area that I research is off of Salado Creek again. But the really interesting part about this, Jeremiah, is that San Antonio literally sits on top of an underground cavern. In fact, we get our water from what's called the Edwards Underground Aquifer. And it is an underground cavern where we get our water. Now, the Edwards Underground Aquifer literally stretches from San Antonio to Austin. That's about, 75, 80 miles from San Antonio to Austin. That is a big underground cavern. The working theory that they have is this. They utilize the Salado Creek as their highway to hunt. I believe this hunting is done mostly at night, and we've got tons of white-tailed deer that are out there very healthy, and there's no hunting in these areas. So they are healthy and looking good. So you've got a great food source in the form of this white-tailed deer. Also, we've got several water sources that run alongside this creek as well. But also, too, at the most northern part of this creek, it goes right into a military base that has a vast, thick, open area. Again, if we're talking about an apex predator that is a master of masking and camouflaging, they probably going up in this area and you would never know where to look because it is so thick, it is so vast. But also, too, that area is what's called the Edwards Underground Aquifer Recharge Zone. And that is where, when it rains, that is where we grab some of our water. I have a theory that these things may be residing underground. They come out at night, do their hunting off of this creek, get their kill, come back, go back underground. Now, again, it's a theory. I have not been able to find an opening that is big enough, but I do know that there are caves back there. I just haven't been able to get out there in those thicker areas yet to discover that. And I'm hoping that I do.
Man, wouldn't it be something if someone reached out because of this as, hey, I've seen him go into the caves, or I had a sighting right next to that military base, man. Rod, I got a feeling some crazy stuff might come out of this interview, and I hope it does for you.
I think so, and I think that if you're somebody that, wants to reach out, please do. There's no judgment with me at all. If you think it's outrageous or weird, I want to hear about it. My philosophy on this is that if you're open to some of it, you have to be open to all of it. You really do.
I think that's a great way to look at it. You got to have an open mind and not put it in a box. But man, Rod, what a fun conversation about an area we don't really talk about a lot, but you are doing some great work, really getting into it, getting your whole family involved, and I love it. Do you have any closing words as we start to wrap up our time here tonight?
I'm just going to say this. There's a reason why we've got Aaron Dees that lives in San Antonio from Small Town Monsters. He lives here. Ken Gerhard lives here. Ryan Edwards lives here. I'm very blessed that I've got friends that I can reach out that live in the same city and bounce ideas off and ask questions. I'm very blessed in that area. And so when you think of San Antonio, there's activity going on. I guarantee you there is. And my part of what I try to convey is don't leave us out, because we've got stuff going on here too as well. And just because, again, it's a big city or it's a city that's growing, that there couldn't be any type of activity cryptid-wise going on, I beg to differ. I really do. I would say, hey, come out, talk to me, get a hold of me. I would love to hear your stories. I would love to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, Rod, thank you for coming back on the show, and we'll have to definitely stay in touch. Let me know if there's any updates from your research in the future, and we'll have to talk to you again at a later time.
Man, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time. I have so much respect for what you do, Jeremiah. And again, kudos to you, man, for making this a full-time thing and putting in all the hard work. And I think more good things are coming your way, brother.
Thank you, Rod.
Base you had going on there, but it's up to you, whatever you do.
Okay.
Yeah, listen, I've been driving for 25 years. I haven't seen I can't be safe, but you know what? I've been through mostly every forestal area from New Hampshire all the way over to Oregon, Washington, Mendocino. But listen, this year for the first time, me and my infinite wisdom, right? It was late winter time. I was in Wyoming. Let me get the map out so I could I was out at the exact spot. I have this vivid map of the United States in my head. I could travel everywhere without a map, but I want to get this exact spot. Maybe somebody else will call in, right? So listen, in that month of March, I was out in Lander, shut down for last year was about 3 days. And in this year, late in the year, shut down for about 3 days in Lander. So we sat there. I was speaking with some guys that work for the Department of whatever, wildlife, national parks. These guys make the snowmobile routes.
Okay.
So I figured I'd ask about Bigfoot. They laughed at me, which it doesn't hurt my feelings because I'm never going to stop asking. When I believe in something or I think something is in my brain just hitting it and I think it's possible in reality, whatever it is, I'll hit it and look for it. But anyways, I come over to Worland. I think it was in either Worland or Thermopolis. But I was loading twice empty Pepsi soda cans, going to several distributors around the nation, right? So me and my infinite wisdom this one trip, I didn't want to go all the way back south and grab I-80. So I said, it's about 2:00. If I can make it up Bighorn Mountain, I had never been to that stretch. I'm always trying to do stupid stuff like this, right? But being an experienced truck driver, I know what I can handle. When now that this other guy was speaking about Cortez, that 550 going up Cortez is amazing. But as a truck driver, you don't want to do that in winter. So anyways, I'm coming up Bighorn, and I look at the map. I look at AccuWeather. It looks like it's great. So I come up the freaking mountain, and I'm thinking, if I could just make it over the top by 3:15, I'll be over it, and I could land on the other side. And it was a great mistake. I put myself in this situation where I had to call my son. I always call my kids. They're already young adults. So every time I find myself in a bad situation, I'll call one of my kids and tell them, listen, this is where I'm at. If I don't call you back in 30 minutes, you might want to call state troopers to look for me up there because I didn't make it across. And so obviously, when you get up top of these peaks, you learn as a truck driver that whatever the weather was like, down or closer to, which is not sea level, but the lower you are, whatever, 2,000, 3,000 feet above sea level, it's nothing like what you're going to be at 4,500 feet, 5,000. Me and my infinite wisdom, again, coming up Bighorn Mountains, it was a great scenery coming all the way up. I was light, so it wasn't really scary issue because I'm usually scared if I'm heavy. So I was like, I make it to the top of the mountain, but at the rate of speed I was going, because it wasn't snowing, but all the snow that had fallen was drifting into the road, but it was already about 22 degrees, 25 degrees. So it was freezing on the road at this time. And of course, the way the sun is setting, as you're coming up this, I believe it's Highway 14. I want to say it's hold on, let me look at the map. No, I'm lying. It's Highway 16 or 15, whatever it is. But anyways, while I'm coming up this highway, right? And the sun's setting, of course, it sets to the west. So as you're coming up this highway, the highest peak of the mountain sits to your left because I'm trying to hit I-90. So I'm basically going north or actually east. So the sun's hitting the road. It's freezing the snow that's drifting over. When I get to the high, I already called my son, let him know, if I don't make it across in about an hour, I'm going to need you to do something for me. So, and just in case I lose signal and I can't reach somebody, because it's happened before. But I get to the top of the mountain, the highest peak of the mountain, and I'm just glad the sun isn't all the way down because we're not hitting 15, 12 degrees, whatever it is. But as I'm going to the top of the mountain, something went across from the lower point, from the right over to the left, the size of the footprints. And I've heard, because I've never seen Bigfoot tracks, I've never gone out hunting. There's a lot of people in New Mexico off that 60 highway, all that stuff. And our closest forest is Ruidoso, New Mexico, Mescalero Mountains, whatever. But I've never done this. I've just been a truck driver. That's what I've been doing. But the size of these footprints were enormous, and I could see them from far away. Because at this, if you contemplate on the weather and the way the road condition is, I'm not going to do over 20 miles an hour. But I'm going to be steady at 20 miles an hour because that's my experience. I can handle my vehicle. As I'm hitting these tracks, it's amazing. Look, and I've heard bear tracks the bear kind of steps right over its own foot. So they look enormous. But the spread between each track must have been about, and I never got off my vehicle, must have been about 6 feet apart. That's just sitting at the top of my rig. As I'm coming by and I see this set of tracks going over the road, and then it went over a barbed wire fence, must have been about 4.5, 5 feet tall. The way the tracks looked going over the road, over the barbed wire, seems like it was Andre the Giant went over that wrestling rope on the wrestling ring. It looked like an animal. I thought to myself, it must have been a bear. But because I'm a fearful person and I believe in my instinct, I didn't stop. I didn't want to stop and take a picture, but I said, if it is what I think it is, do I want to be caught off my vehicle, icy conditions, and then risking that my vehicle is not going to have the traction I already have? I'm not stupid. I'm not going to put myself in that situation. So these people want to be in a ranch or go wherever they are. What are you going to do in front of one of these creatures? Pray to God? That's about the last thing you have. So I drove by it. I looked at it. So when I got over to Buffalo, there's a little truck stop as soon as you hit I-90, right? Before you hit I-90, I think it's a Sinclair or whatever it is. There's a young man in there. So I go in there, warm up the soup, whatever. It's a cold night. I'm glad I made it down the mountain. I call my son. And when I walk in that truck stop, as a young kid, I'm like, listen, I have a question. Have you lived here? He's like, yeah, I lived all my life. I'm like, do you hunt? Yeah, of course. It's Buffalo. We hunt here. That's what we grew up doing. I'm like, listen, is there a bear? Are there bears out there right now? He said, there's bears, but there's no bears. It's mid-March, late March. They don't come out till about late April out of hibernation. I'm like, wow, I never took that because I'm from the desert. I don't know this stuff. I never took it into perspective. I'm like, are you serious? So at this time, there's 2 hunters walking in, right? And he goes, why is that? I'm like, dude, I've seen some tracks on top of Bighorn. I'm talking about huge tracks, and the spread between each footprint was just, I didn't stop and take pictures. I'll tell you what I saw. He goes, yeah, buddy, there's no bears right now. I'm like, what about Bigfoot? And as I'm talking, I didn't realize these hunters were grabbing coffee listening to me, right? They're a little older, they're about 30, 35. And one of them asked me, listen, where'd you see this again? I'm like, at the highest point of the Bighorn Mountains, coming up this highway, whatever, 16, 15, whatever it was. Jeremiah, they did not hesitate. They grabbed their coffee, they paid for it, and they ran out that way. Now, this is the thing. Whatever made these tracks, I firmly believe they were not hoaxes, because the way the snow drifts, the way as you step on snow, I would have seen somebody else's tracks. Like if there was people faking these tracks, you would have been able to see these tracks all around these big footprints. Whatever these prints, like it was just amazing. That's the only thing I've seen. Now, on a different occasion, down by Grapevine, I was at the Pilot truck stop in California, close to where these people were just talking about this, whatever, right? There's some guys in the U.S. Department of Forestry. This is back in 2022, 23, I want to say, early 23, late 22. I was up in the Lincoln National Forest, and I didn't see anything. I just felt there's this eerie feeling. Like I'm telling you, I've been through all these forests. There's an eerie feeling there. Up on that U.S. Highway 20 in Oregon, leading up to Portland. Dude, that is amazing forestry. If Bigfoot lives somewhere, that's a perfect area. Now, Lincoln National Forest, I've been through Yosemite, I've been through Yellowstone, I can tell you, there's one other spot that I've been that I didn't know existed. After all these years of driving, was coming in from Wisconsin, from the Madison area. I didn't know you could reach over to Michigan through the top part. I didn't know that existed. So when I did go through there and I seen these big old wood carvings that people made of Bigfoot, that's another area that, you know what, if that beast exists, that's a perfect area. But anyways, back to my grapevine story. 2 kids from U.S. Department, I call them kids because they're younger than 30 years old, right? So they got the U.S. Department of Forestry. I asked them flat out, I'm like, listen, guy, I need to ask you a question. Like, what? Same way I asked these other people that work for those, making these snowmobile routes in Wyoming. I asked these guys from the U.S. Department of Forestry, I'm like, do you guys believe in Bigfoot? Is there something in, and then one of them jumps up and without no ridicule to my comment, his eyes open up and he says, listen, I was stationed up in the Lincoln National Park for about 2 years. He said, I'm going to tell you one thing. I don't know if it's Bigfoot, but there's something up on those mountains. And it was so severe that we couldn't go out on our own. We had to have a partner with us at all times. That's all he said. But by the look in his face, and then the other one, I guess they had just been assigned in the same area recently. The other one talked about Mendocino. I don't know if you heard about Mendocino, but it's beautiful. It reminds me a lot of that Oregon stretch. And he also had an encounter in Mendocino, and he said that same situation. There was a moment in Mendocino where they had to go out in groups. They couldn't go out on their own. And it wasn't safe for them, especially at night. Could have been a cougar or whatever, but the way he touched on the topic, he never mentioned a feline. He never mentioned a bear. As the other one mentioned about Lincoln National Forest and whatever, it was something that they don't know, it was unexplained. He emphasized that in Mendocino, they encountered something similar. And that's about it. And it's just, that's all I have to say about that topic. I'm hoping one of these days, like I'm traveling through all these sources, but then I hear all these stories, the way Bigfoot would just sit there, clump himself down, and he'll look like a tree trunk. Am I going to see him going through a highway at 45 miles an hour? Probably not. But these eerie feelings you get all through Oregon, Washington, it's just amazing. There's something, you could feel it. And like people say, there's a instinct that we have, a survival instinct mechanism. And I believe it. And hopefully you get an encounter. I've been hearing these Iowa encounters. Oh, and I had one more thing I wanted to tell you when I gave you my number on email. You had a gentleman talking about, and this is so weird because I thought we're Hispanic. My family's we've been around the Rio Grande for over 100 years. I used to hear my great-grandmother, I think it was Brown Dorf, talking about how his grandparents or his grandpa, or TJ, took a lot of knowledge with him when they passed away, right? My great-grandparents used to talk about a big ball of fire moving through the hills and the mountains, because we're at the base of the Rocky Mountains, right? They talked about this ball of fire moving, and it signified there was a treasure. I had never heard somebody out of our culture, as this one guy from Oklahoma did about a month ago. I forget his name because I don't pay attention to these names, but he was talking about Oklahoma. I think he's forget the name of their tribe, but he's a tribal person. Bear Creek, I believe it was, Bear Creek Nation. Maybe that's in Minnesota or Wisconsin. I'm not sure, but I think he said it was Bear Creek. He thought Bigfoot was taking care of some kind of treasure that the Spaniards might have left behind, and these orbs or balls of fire always came about where these treasures were at. It's insane because my great-grandparents would talk about that. And hearing somebody else from over 800 miles away talk about the same topic, now there's no doubt in my mind, my great-grandparents weren't crazy. There's a lot of things we want to think they're crazy because they're older people, they have no technology in their heads, and all they know is basic roots of truth. They knew how to cure you from disease by taking you into animal stalls like the goat stalls or the cow stalls. And now we realize that having exposure to this positive bacteria creates enzymes in your, these positive enzymes that actually boost your immune system. These people were actually very nature savvy. But this story about the balls of fire, this gentleman from Oklahoma talked about, just really triggered me. And I had to comment to you and let you know what, Jeremiah. He's on to something. I don't know what he's on to, but I remember these stories from my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my mom. They've all passed away already, but I clearly remember these stories of a ball of fire. And all my friends all around El Paso, Texas area, they all know about this. The people that grew up and have grandparents that grew up in that area, we all know about this story about balls, and it all goes back to Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa is a Mexican revolutionary, right? And supposedly he stole a lot of money from the rich. He was like the Peter Pan, if you will. Took a lot of money from the rich and gave it to the poor. But a lot of this money, fortune, treasure, whatever you want to call it, he couldn't carry it in his carriages or his horses, his mules, so he had to bury it and come back for it later. But as the U.S. military hunted him down somewhere in Parral or whatever it was in Chihuahua, he was never able to come back for these treasures, hidden fortunes. And supposedly, that's where you see these balls of fire coming out. It makes sense. If you have some kind of element, like some kind of mineral, like iron or whatever, under zero oxygen circumstances buried in the ground, they might produce gas, like H2S, like oil. You know, I worked in an oil field. And this might produce a ball of fire eventually, if you get the perfect spark or whatever. But I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't go into this stuff. But it makes sense if you just take the root of what these people are talking about. And then now you get this guy from Oklahoma talking about the same scenario, basically. It's just intriguing. Wow. All this time I've been putting it aside thinking my great-grandparents are crazy. But this guy just hit something that nobody should know out of our culture, because that's our thing, and he just hit it. But yeah, Jeremiah, you got a great scenario going on for everybody. Thank you. You entertained me all throughout. You have no idea how many miles I drove because of you. I appreciate you and your followers.
I appreciate that. That makes me feel really good. Man, you've got such a good thing going. You can travel all the Bigfoot spots and talk to people, and man, you're getting some good info. So I appreciate you sharing what you've experienced so far, and please keep me in the loop with what happens next out there.
Yeah, we sure will, Jeremiah. You have a great weekend. It's late. I'll let you do your thing.
All right.
Dedicate so much time to us. I'm pretty sure you got a life. Live it well, and hopefully we'll get in contact with you later.
You got it. Be safe out there, sir.
All right, brother.
Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe and respected environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years, and it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.
Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Slaya. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list.
These are all in Oregon, by the way. Oak Ridge, Dexter, Fall Creek, Deschutes National Forest area, Cultus Lake, Spirit Lake, Subtle Lake, McKenzie River area, Sweet Home area, the area west of Crater Lake, east of 230 West Diamond Lake Highway, and north of 62 Crater Lake Highway.
You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.